Okay, let's talk about Essay 4. Just going to go over the assignment and the examples really quickly just to make sure that you have clear understanding of what's going on with this essay. This should be a fun one for you after having to do a lot of research and focus on argument. I feel like Essay 4 is really refreshing. So this week our emphasis has been poetry, and this essay is not due until the following week, but I want to go ahead and introduce it because you will be actually analyzing a psalm from the Bible or a song, which are both types of poems. So this is just the route I decided to go instead of having you analyze a classic poem to have a little different take on it. So I give you a list. If you have another song in mind or even a different psalm from the Bible, just shoot me an email. Please make sure that you get that approved by me. So basically what you're going to be doing is you will be examining the use of figurative language in the piece of your choosing. So you really will have to read the material about poetry, the poetry selections, look at those notes, watch the video to make sure you understand all these different terms. What is a metaphor? What is a simile? What is imagery? And so basically you're going to be talking about these different elements of figurative language and talking about how does that function in this song? What does it mean? So in other words, the whole point of your paper is to discuss what is the deeper meaning or significance shown through the poet's use of language. So I do expect you to still have basic organization of an essay: introduction, thesis statement, body paragraphs, and conclusion. So there are a couple different ways you can organize your body paragraphs. You can either work through the poem, chronologically, so taking it one stanza at a time, or you can arrange it according to literary elements. So in other words, you might have a paragraph focused on similes and another paragraph focused on imagery. And the two samples that I have posted kind of demonstrate these two methods of organization. So research, you're not doing any outside research for this essay, which what that means is your only source is your song or your psalm. So you aren't looking up any other articles. Your analysis should be completely your own. So I actually really encourage you to stay off the internet. You don't have to use outside sources, and you're actually not supposed to for this paper. So you will have quotations integrated into your essay, and then your works cited page will just cite, the one piece that you're analyzing. So the same MLA format we've been using previously with the header of your name, my name, the class, and the date. Include a word count at the end. Stay in third person, just as we have been doing. So here are your choices. I chose 3 different psalms that have a lot of good figurative language, and then just some different sacred songs that also have a lot of figurative language. So I chose these very specifically because I know that these are going to be easy for you to analyze because they're full of similes and metaphors and imagery and personification, things like that. So that's one reason if you want to write on something different, you need to ask me about it, because I'm going to take a look at it and be like, well, this whole song only has one element of figurative language, so that's really not going to work for this paper, or, whatever. So then here I have the different songs printed out. And the reason I did it this way, I'm not going to go through all these, is so when it comes time to cite, you can basically just cite this as a handout, this is how you do it. You give the last name and first name of the author, the title of the song in quotation marks, and then just handout as your medium of publication, as your publisher. And then there's a specific way to cite the Bible. So you can see that MLA handout that I have, I think posted way back in week 1 or 2, on how to cite the Psalms. So let's get into a couple of these examples. And the examples are actually focused on poetry, but it's the same idea. Songs are poems. They're just set to music. So these aren't perfect examples. This one has some issues with just clarity And but what I did want you to see, first of all, is the thesis statement. The student wrote that similes, metaphors, and repetition convey Angelo's pride towards her conquering of criticism, sexism, and racism in the poem Still I Rise. And that is an excellent thesis statement. So basically, you're identifying the figurative language, similes, metaphors, and repetition, and basically what does it mean? How does it function in this song? So I am looking for you at the end of your introduction to have a very concise statement about how figurative language functions in the piece that you're analyzing. And then you can also see that this person is organizing their paper according to the different elements of figurative language. So the whole first paragraph is about similes, which works really well. And so what you're going to do, the use of similes is frequent as Angelo compares her personal situations with those that most people will comprehend. And then you give a quote. When she realizes that her sassiness is the reason of upsetting an individual, she says the reason is because I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. So you have a quote from your song, and the way you quote poetry is actually by line number. So you give the last name, and then you give the lines of the poem, so you'll actually have to go through and number those lines in the songs. Now, if you're citing the Bible, then it's going to be chapter and verse. And this slash here is indicating that it moved from one line to the next. So that's how you format quotes from a poem, and that's how you do your in-text citations. So he gives the quote, and then the student explains really well. She's proud of her success and of her accomplishments. She compares her walk in life with the striking of oil wells. The comparison shows that she feels rich in the life she has lived and strived in. And that's all you're doing in this essay. You're giving an example. Here's a simile. Here's what the author means. Here's what the comparison is. So I always tell students with Essay 4, I would rather you feel like you're overstating or stating the obvious than being too subtle. It's like, oh, well, clearly this is what this simile means. Well, show me that you understand what it means. I want you guys to very clearly explain the different elements and that you can draw a connection between the comparison of her walking like she's got oil wells in her living room and what does that mean? Oil wells equals wealth, so she feels rich in her life. Just spell it all out there. And so then they have another example. And then the next paragraph, they move on to metaphors, which, I hope you remember the difference between similes and metaphors is the use of like or as. So here she uses like, I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room. Whereas in this line, she says, I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide. So not I'm like a black ocean, but I am. So that's the difference between simile and metaphor. So then this whole paragraph is about metaphor, and then the last paragraph, the author talks about repetition. So this is a good mode of organizing your paper based on literary element. Whether you have 2 longer paragraphs or 3 kind of medium to short paragraphs. This essay is not quite as long as previous ones you've written, so you really could get away with 2 longer body paragraphs if you wanted to. So that's sample A. Then sample B is about a different poem, and this gives an example of basically just walking through the poem or the song as it's written. This student also has a good thesis statement. In Roetke's poem, My Papa's Waltz, the effective use of metaphors portrays a comparison between waltzing and a father who physically abuses his son. So this person is going to talk about the use in, really this whole poem is an extended metaphor. So he's focusing just on the idea of metaphor, which is fine. And so he starts with the opening lines. And again, he gives a quote and then explains what it means. And then gives a quote and explains what it means. And so you should have in each of your body paragraphs, you should have at least one quote from your song or your psalm that you're explaining this is what that comparison means. This is what this imagery means. But he organizes it more by stanza. So he talks about those first 4 lines, and then he moves into the second stanza. And then the third paragraph is in the third stanza. So you could also organize your essay this way, and part of it just depends on how long the song or psalm is, because you may not have, you may not have the words, the word count to be able to walk through every single figurative element of figurative language. You may have to pick and choose if you have a longer song, which ones are the most powerful. But this was a pretty short poem, so the student was able to walk through each stanza. His did end up being a little longer, though. He's right at that word count. So, look over these. They're both really good examples of what I'm looking for, especially as far as a balance of quotations and explanation. So the main way that students fail or do poorly in Essay 4 is if they don't include quotations from their poem, or they don't clearly identify elements of figurative language. So if you are not using words like simile, metaphor, personification, imagery, repetition, verbal irony, if you're not using those terms, then you're not going to do well. That's the whole point of this assignment, is for you to identify figurative language in a poem, a song, a psalm, and be able to explain what it means. So I hope that makes sense. Like I said, have some fun with this one. Make sure you really choose a song or a psalm that's meaningful to you, that you can really get into, and that this will be hopefully a meaningful exercise for you. As always, let me know if you have any questions.